Welcome to the Bad Roman Podcast. On this show, we talk with veterans, community leaders, Christians and non-Christians as we explore the entanglement of Christians with the state. The Bad Roman Project was created out of the firm belief that as Christians, we are called to follow Christ, not the state. Here is your host, Craig Hargis.
Hey folks, today I have Benje Graves on the show. He is a pastor at Vision Community Church in Marcion, Idaho.
Would you rather serve God than serve Caesar, you feel me? Right. I'm just trying to live what he said. I'm just trying to live what he said. I ain't scared, I will take one to the head. Go ahead. So it's safe to say that I'm bad.
How are you doing today, Benje?
I'm doing great, Craig. How you doing?
I'm doing fantastic. So why don't you give us a little background of yourself so people can be familiar with you before we get started?
Well, yeah, my name's Benje Graves. I'm originally from Alaska, down here in Marcion, Idaho now. We planted a church here about 20 years ago, and my wife and I were on the road doing music, evangelism, teaching stuff, publishing things, all kinds of stuff for about 13 years before we came here. And we still travel some, but we're kind of settled a little bit here in Marcion.
So how you got connected to the Scott Horton show is interesting to me, and it's going to be interesting to folks listening who are part of the Libertarian Circle. You pastored William Griggs, and I'm a little bit familiar with him, but this is how you got connected with Scott Horton, right?
Yeah, Will Grigg was a good friend of mine. He also had a mutual friend. I met him through a mutual friend, Scott Watson, who also was mutual friends with Scott Horton. So that's how we ended up. I ended up on the Scott Horton show. Will Grigg was a member of our church here, and just a wonderful, wonderful guy.
Well, it was interesting to come across you on his podcast because, and I listen to Scott Horton quite a bit. I love it. I love his show, and he's just he's from Texas too, so he's a little snarky, and I get his snark when he's talking to people on his show. So I'm laughing along while listening to him because I get the Texas snark. I catch it pretty quickly, and I looked up some stuff on William Griggs. He was part of the John Birch Society. Wrote for the New American, and I was once part of the Birch Society as well. I was a Bircher, and he had a falling out with them as I did too. And I think it seems like he kind of woke up to what was going on, and I think that's what happened with me too, because the John Birch Society to me is just too statist.
Yeah, that was my understanding from Will. I didn't know him during that time period. He was already past that when I got to know him. But my understanding, and Will was a tremendously principled individual, and the lack of consistency or abundance of compromise, whatever, either one, would be hard for him to handle. So
yeah, and we were talking before we started recording about he took a red pill, and the red pill was funny to me because, as I told you, Fox News had a Facebook post. And Elon Musk is trying to get out of California and move to Texas because California has too many restrictions on what he's trying to do. And he said, I think it was a tweet on Twitter, and he's like, red pill? And Republicans jumped all over this. They're like, he's going to start voting Republican now. He's a Republican. He's taking the red pill. And I was like, wait, that's not what it means.
Yeah, he got saved. Yeah.
He got saved in California through Fox News. It's amazing how this works.
It's evangelistic network, the Fox News Evangelistic Network. There you go. Yeah.
Like TBN, right?
Yeah. A lot of people think that's the Christian station. So
yeah, I used to watch TBN quite a bit. And I was like, this is awesome. This is how it's supposed to be. Now looking back, this is gross.
It's so cheesy. Yeah.
It is so cheesy. Like, I don't know if you're familiar with, I think his name is Charles Stanley. I think he's a Baptist preacher. I really like listening to him because he's a good teacher, and I listen to him. But I would catch him on the TVN network, and that's how I started watching. But some of the stuff that goes on that channel is just
there's some nutty stuff.
Oh, it's frustrating. So listening to your conversation with Scott, and even back in my active voting days, I always had a sense of individualism. Like, that's what drew me to anarchy, was the individual. But even then, and I know now that it was stupid to try to think that we're going to get to the individual through a political party.
Mm-hmm. Right.
I don't know if it's something that I grew up with, something I was taught, something my mom taught me, but individualism has always been very important to me. And that's what drew me to anarchy. And when you were talking to Scott, you said, you mentioned how you can reason with an individual. And I love that, because I truly believe what we are doing is going to have to be a one person at a time approach. Talking to a collective, it's almost impossible to reason with them.
Right.
Any success in the individual approach.
Yeah, and that is the red pill, blue pill concept. It's the coming from the Men in Black movie and all that. That the person is intelligent, the collective, the group is paranoid, crazy, and blind. There's a lot of truth in that, and groupthink has a certain momentum that's hard to get around, and it's supported so much by things like the news cycle and everything else that you're competing with that. And that's why I think that the most important thing is to individually be able to get people to ask the right questions. We think the trick is to give them the right answers, which is nothing wrong with that. And certainly facts are good. Information is good. But it needs to be aimed at getting them to ask the right questions of themselves. That's what changed me after all the years in early 2000s. Before the early 2000s, I was a card-carrying neocon evangelical, and then things started to shift there in the early 2000s. And, I voted for George W. Bush the first time in 2000, and then that didn't go quite like I planned. And that's when I started to go, wait a minute, there's problems here. So that was the questioning moment. So I think when we can do that with an individual, and that came from people who, told me things that at first I probably reacted to with animosity. Like, how can you even say that? The classic, if you don't love this country, leave it, kind of go somewhere else kind of mentality.
Why don't you move to Somalia?
Yeah, or name something better. That's just not the point. If anything that thinks it's above criticism is missing the point. And so I started to look at that and say, wait a minute, some of this stuff just doesn't line up. And then, of course, ultimately, the most important thing is it didn't line up scripturally. I was looking at what Jesus said, and I was looking at that. And I've come from Alaska too, and I think it's probably not unlike Texas. Kind of the tough guy. You punch me in the face, I punch you in the face, kind of deal. And that didn't really reconcile with Scripture either. And then I looked, hey, we're living that out nationally. And so how can I support it there if I don't support it, individually? So I think those things are important to get people to get them to ask the right question.
Well, it's funny you said that, because somebody told me yesterday on one of my Facebook posts, he goes, no, Jesus punched people and he turned tables on top of them and whipped them. I was like, no, he didn't. Where are you getting this from? He didn't.
Well, they love to go to that. Everybody loves to go to Jesus turning the tables. And they were making a mockery of his father's house. He said they were doing all these things. And he certainly had ability to express anger. As the Bible says, be angry and do not sin. He wasn't sinning, but he was angry, but he wasn't punching anybody or beating anybody up or dropping bombs on them or anything.
So, well, they also like to say, well, what about, he said to sell your cloak and buy a sword. He's told us to buy a sword. I was like, well, yeah, but there was a specific reason why he said to get a sword. It wasn't to go harm people. And you can see it when he immediately rebuked Peter for cutting the Roman soldier's ear off. And then he healed the Roman soldier.
Yeah, and that's the context. That's where you look at it. He said, this is not why I came. And you see Jesus before Pilate, and they have, Pilate saying, I could release you. And he said, you'd have no power if my father hadn't given it to you from above. This is basically part of the plan. And Pilate seems to kind of be struggling with the whole thing. And then he even goes in and says to him, that's in John 19, he says, away with him. The people are saying, away with him, crucify him. And Pilate says, shall I crucify your king? And the chief priests say, we have no king but Caesar. And that's just such an amazing statement to me. And that's what a lot of people are saying. They're saying, we have no king but Caesar. And a kind of a funny story. I was at a fair with a friend, Scott Watson, same guy I mentioned earlier. And Scott there was these two young kids, I think probably 10 years old. And Scott said, what does it make you think if I say no king but Jesus? And these two kids go, yes, absolutely. And then they paused for a minute and they go, well, and Donald Trump, and we just laughed and laughed. We said, that's just so perfect because it's exactly what we're talking about,
Well, when you look at, I don't know how much time you spend on Facebook, but if you go And look at a Franklin Graham post.
Mm-hmm.
I love the idea of speaking to the individual because I think there is some kind of, we're making progress that way. But if you jump on a Franklin Graham post, man, it's almost like these people are doubling down in their support of the state.
Yeah, it's really discouraging. Franklin Graham is one of the ones that has just been the most discouraging to me, actually, in the support.
He's not his dad, that's for sure.
Yeah, and it's just I mean, I think a person could come out. I'd still disagree with them, but they could come out and say, I'd say I have a little more respect for people who voted for like Donald Trump out of fear of Hillary than I do those who just acted like he's the Messiah.
Oh, see, that's something we talk about. We've talked about this on the shows. So when Barack Obama was elected, and the way that people were just in love with him, I was like, man, they're treating him like the Messiah. He's the next coming of Jesus. But you know what? Looking back, they didn't have nothing on how Trump supporters are, in my opinion.
Oh, no, not at all. There were a lot of people that a little delusional with Obama, with the whole idea of, he's going to get into office, he's going to buy us all free houses and stuff, But this whole thing of Trump will save us is, it's like those kids, obviously they heard this at home or whatever. They say, yeah, we have no king but Jesus, and Donald Trump, obviously they're young kids, and it's pretty crazy to put those two people in the same sentence, Jesus and Donald Trump. But their parents probably do. Their parents probably are sitting there just going, "This is it." And when you hear somebody saying, it's all about this next election, everything rides on this next election. There's and these are Christian people saying, that this is all about the next election. And I keep going, no, it's not. It's not about the next election. It shouldn't. We shouldn't think that way, because the bottom line is it comes down to where's your hope and where's your trust. If your hope and your trust is in that, if you're reacting out of fear, you just really don't understand what it means to be a part of the kingdom of God.
Well, and Jesus was very clear. He said, my kingdom is not of this world.
Mm-hmm. If it was, my servants would rise up and fight, he says.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I want Christians, and that's what we're trying to do with this project, is to get Christians. I'm not so much interested in trying to convince a non-Christian, because my frustration when I was toying with the idea of doing this podcast, I didn't know what direction we were going to go. I sent out some feelers to see how people would respond to it. But at the whole time, my frustration with Christians was just growing, and how they were responding to the state. And I want Christians to step back, take a look, and compare what Jesus taught us in the Sermon on the Mount and compare it to what the United States government is doing. There's no correlation whatsoever.
Yeah, and it's back to where is your hope? It's not in our hope should not be in chariots, horses or chariots, or these things. I mean, our hope is supposed to be in Jesus Christ, and you see this kind of amazing thing happening in the New Testament, because people kind of forget that they were under tremendous oppression from the Roman government. From the conditions were quite, they weren't exactly favorable toward the church, and yet that doesn't seem to be very deeply on their mind. They're just really focused on kingdom ideals.
Well, have you noticed, and with the upcoming election, have you noticed a trend away from politics by Christians? I mean, the reason I ask is because I have mixed feelings about this. Going back to the individual, I have noticed that move. But if you jump on, like I said, on a Franklin Graham Facebook post, it's almost as if the collective had doubled down on their support for the state. But just in your congregation, maybe, or talking to folks, outside of your church, have you noticed any kind of move away from that, like a trend away from politics?
A trend away, not as much as I think it should be, but it's not the same as 2016. And of course, I have my own microcosm here. One of the things, though, is we do here in our area, Idaho in general, big Republican state. In our particular area of Idaho that we live in, Democrats are practically extinct. And that almost makes it tougher in a lot of ways, because it's just such an accepted norm here. So I see a little less of the Donald Trump will save us, it's all going to be great. And I see a little more of a necessary evil kind of approach to it. But what you said is exactly true. The individual, I can have this conversation, the same conversation I'm having with you right now. I can have this conversation with almost any individual that I know. The people in our congregation I tend to be pretty close to. It's a very relational mode of pastoring here, and so most of them I would call close friends, and so I could have this conversation. I can't even think of anybody right now I couldn't have this conversation with. Not that there are many that don't agree with me, but there are many I could have this conversation with. And by the end of that conversation, they would largely, on many points, be agreeing with me on the stuff that you and I are talking about right now. Talk to them 2 days later after they've gone back and watched the news cycle for a while and talked to some of their other friends, and it's all about the election in November.
The most important election of our lifetime. How many times have you heard that garbage?
Well, they all are. I've never had one that wasn't. And I'm saying they think they are. But yeah, it's the most important election of our lifetime. We're all going to die. If I say anything criticizing anything Trump has done, then they immediately go to, then you want Biden to be president, which is just ridiculous.
Oh, I got that message not too long ago, just through Facebook, and she's like, "So you're all against Donald Trump? Does that mean you want Joe Biden in office?" Like, no.
Yeah. It's like,
I'm not. How many times I've been in a debate with a conservative, and I use the term conservative loosely because these people are not conservatives. If you're supporting Donald Trump, you're not a conservative. I mean, that's period. But I think they all suck.
yeah.
I'm an anarchist. I don't. My king is Jesus. I'm following that guy. I'm not going to follow Donald Trump, Joe Biden, Hillary Clinton, anybody. They all suck to me, and they have nefarious plans to steal my liberty. And I take my liberty very, very seriously because I fully believe that God created us with this liberty. So why would I not take it seriously? So I stay away from all that, because if I'm going to put my trust into a flawed human being to save me or to protect me, man, come on. I'm going to die. I'm just going to follow Jesus. That guy has a better idea than any of these others do. And that's the way Christians, in my opinion, should be viewing politics.
Yeah. You go back to 1 Samuel, and where they're saying, give us a king. We want a king. And they're demanding a king. In that setting. And I've got on my YouTube channel, one of the messages there is choose this day, give us a king. And it's about that, because the same thing is happening right now. And I'm trying to get people to understand that, that their reasoning was give us a king to rule over us. And why? So we can be like the other nations. That's a great idea. And they've been led by prophets. They've been led by the Lord for many, many, many years. It wasn't that far back in history when the whole give us a king thing happened. And all of a sudden they say, give us a king to fight our battles for us, all of this stuff, because we want to be like the other nations. And it's the same thing. We're still just crying out, give us a king. And the irony was they were telling Samuel, they're saying, give us a king. We want a king. And they already had a king. They had the best king possible. And that's true of the church today, of the body of Christ. I mean, they say, okay, give us a king. Well, we have a king, we have the best possible king that there is. And so we're not lacking in a king. We have one. We just seem to want a human king to tell us what to do, I guess. So,
well, you mentioned 1 Samuel, and God laid out what is going to happen when you ask for a man-made government.
He lays it right out. Yeah.
And it still holds true today. It has not changed. Everything he said when he told Samuel, this is what's going to happen when you ask for a king. I'm already your king, but you're asking for a man to rule over you. This is what's going to happen. And it's so clear. And when people push back against us, I don't know if you claim to be an anarchist or not, but as an anarchist myself, they believe that we've always had some sort of man-made government. That's not true. God did not create man-made government. Man did.
Right. He demanded it. And the anarchist thing, that's, I had to look up the definition actually when I started listening to your show. It's one of those things, and by the definition, it's not, everybody always thinks that's a bunch of people joining a gang to have a riot or something, and obviously it's about, not even just self-governance. I mean, we're not talking about self-governance. We're talking about godly governance. We're talking about the Lord being the leader of our lives, the Lord being the one that we follow. And like I said, we do have a king. We have the best king possible. So I basically call it scriptural governance. It's just biblical. that we have a king. It's not like we're totally undirected or something. We have much direction.
Well, as I was transforming or transitioning into anarchism and understanding what it actually meant, not what Fox News is calling anarchists, because those folks are not anarchists, by the way. I mean, I don't care what Donald Trump says. I don't care what Sean Hannity says. Those folks are not anarchists. When I was started studying anarchy, and as a Christian, I was like, wait a second, this kind of goes together. When you can compare what anarchism is and compare to following Christ, it's the same. I mean, in my opinion, the early church, they were anarchists. They didn't call themselves anarchists, obviously. But if you go back and look at how they responded to the state, they had no use for it. I don't know if you're familiar with Tertullian. I love this guy. He was so nonsense. And even a letter he wrote to the Romans, he's like, we have no interest in that. It's completely foreign to us.
Right.
And this is all prior to Constantine. Once Constantine took hold of Christianity, it all went to, I don't know, to hell in a handbasket, basically. Mm-hmm. But the early church, and I take this stance, like when I started studying the Constitution, it was important for me to understand what the founders meant behind the Constitution, not just what the Constitution said, but I want to know the meaning behind it. And I do that. I take that same line of thinking with Christianity. I want to know what the early church thought and how they responded to the state. So studying that, and it's something that I've just started doing. Work is super busy, so I haven't had a chance to get into it as much, but it's very important to know what they were closer to these situations than we are. You look at somebody like Polycarp. He was taught directly by the Apostle John. And so if you can take what these guys are saying and understand how they view the state, wouldn't that make more sense for us to kind of follow that direction as well as Christians?
Well, there's an interesting, it's extremely loud by its absence, obvious by its absence. And they're under a very oppressive government. They're basically not only under the oppressive government, but also the early Christians are under oppression from the Jewish religious elite of the time, kind of from all sides. And what's interesting is how little is actually said about it. And that in itself says a lot. There's the thing they were concerned about was Judaizers bringing in false doctrine and bringing in this works-based salvation type stuff. You got to go back to law. They were concerned about that because it was directly against the kingdom of God. You see very little apart from that. And that kind of speaks volumes on its own, I think.
The works-based salvation, I'm glad you brought that up because it's something that drives me crazy too, because how in the world do you think you can work your way into heaven?
Yeah.
We are incapable of doing that.
Yeah, that's right.
That was the whole reason for Jesus. I mean, you cannot. I could do my best to be as good as I can, a good person on a daily basis, but it's still not good enough.
Right. All of our hope is in Christ, and that's what I say too. That's all of our hope is in Christ, and if you when you get up to heaven, they're probably not going to look and see if you registered as a Republican. So
there's a voting booth as you walk through the pearly gates.
Yeah, I'm looking here. For most of your years, you were registered as a Republican, so I guess you're okay. It's kind of
you did good for a little while, Craig. So we're going to let you in. You voted Republican for 16 years. That's good enough for us.
Yeah, that's right. It's just funny how people equate certain things. A Republican's good, Democrats bad. If you're say, well, no, I'm not a Republican, then you must be a Democrat. If you start criticizing something the Republicans are doing, then they'll, if you do manage to get somebody cornered on something, then they'll go, oh yeah, well, look at what Nancy Pelosi did. And I'm like going, well, who cares what Nancy Pelosi did? That's not might be bad. I don't want to say don't care, but it's like, why are we going there? Why can't we talk about these guys that are the heroes, almost heroes of the faith, although that's ridiculous to say, within the political realm? And why can't we talk about them without people thinking that, obviously we're for the other team,
Well, actually, I don't care what Nancy Pelosi says. I don't care what Donald Trump says.
At least you're concerned. That's good. I feel the same. I just go, you know what, guys? The thing that drives me the craziest is this whole this person will save us. Like I say, you could remove the names. You could remove Donald Trump or Nancy Pelosi or Joe Biden. You could remove all those names and put other people in those slots. And I'd still be saying the same thing. We just shouldn't be putting our hope there. That's just not where it is.
Well, I mean, if you look like the temptation of Jesus, and we've talked about this on this podcast before, if you look at the temptation of Jesus, and when Satan offered him all of the kingdoms of the world, he was given authority all of the kingdoms of the world. As Christians, you got to step back and say, wait a second, if he's got the authority of the kingdoms of this world, why would I want to be a part of it?
Right.
Jesus didn't dispute what Satan was saying, but he had no interest in it. He said, he had no interest.
Right. I say, if you got an opportunity to affect good, okay, great. But we need to understand that as believers, we're always working from the outside in. We're not part of the inside. If you got a chance that some terrible thing's happening, the mayor is doing something nuts, and you got a chance to go down there and challenge that, okay, fine. But don't be a part of it. It's a different system. It's a whole different kingdom, and they don't mesh. It's like I said, they're going two different directions. And that's what I try to get people to understand. And like I say, in a group, it's difficult. Although even in a group, I can get people to kind of go, maybe there's something to that. But again, they go home and they turn on their television, or they go to their favorite news sites online, or their particular group of Facebook friends, and it just sweeps back over them. The panic, the fear. Oh, we've got to get our guy in, or we're all going to die. It's the church is going to be, this is going to happen to the church. And it's true under Constantine is when, the church became very building centric and all that kind of stuff, and organization centric. And and that led into it, because then the church really kind of got involved in the whole political world. And all of a sudden, the idea was that if the church infiltrates politics to a certain level, then we can basically make this world a Christian world. And that's kind of where this concept of a Christian nation eventually comes out of, which nations aren't a nation is not something that gets born again. Individuals and people get born again.
Right. And can you imagine, this is something that I think about quite a bit, but can you imagine if Tertullian, Polycarp, or Origen walked into your average church today in America? Can you imagine how they would respond to it?
Oh yeah,
they wouldn't even recognize it as a church. I spent a lot of time, and I spoke with Bruxy Cavey in this recent episode, but in a Southern Baptist church, it was normal to have a ceremony or to honor the military. It was normal to have the United States flag on the stage behind the pastor. It was normal to me. Yeah. Right. But looking back, and even Tertullian said, shall we carry a flag? That's against Christ. And I'll just look at what Jesus taught and compare it to what the government's doing. It's so contrary. It's vastly different than how they were back then.
Yeah, and I basically call it nationalistic idolatry. And that there is this, spoke on it quite a bit here lately, and particularly in the last year. And I've been talking about it all for many years, but I think that's been a little more focused as of late. But we don't have a flag up there in ours. But traveling, of course, I've been to many, many different church groups, and you pretty much never see one without a flag up there. Somebody recently told us that they came and started being in the church, said they're just so thrilled that there was no flag up front. To me, that seems normal now, because I haven't been traveling as much, and that's not a thing at ours. But most places, that's just considered to be part and parcel of the whole thing. That's part of church. Well,
I remember sitting in a church service when, I don't remember if it was Veterans Day or Memorial Weekend or whatever, but I remember they were asking veterans to stand up so we could applaud them and thank them for their service. And then the pastor had us all stand up and pledge allegiance to the flag.
Oh, wow.
And the whole time we were doing it, like I said, it was normal to me. Like we're supposed to be doing that as a Christian nation. So, but looking back and now, and this is really pissed off a lot of friends that I have, or even family members when I talk about this. We're not supposed to be doing this. It's not right.
No, it's a multiple personality disorder thing where it's like the two kingdoms are not compatible. That's the thing, and what happens. The only thing that can happen when the church dives deep into that and thinks we're going to change things that way is compromise. There's no way around that. And now, in our day, we have a lot of dominionist movement people. The idea that if we force our way into government, we can make the world a better place, create an environment where Jesus can return, kind of thing. It's crazy stuff, but I mean, that's their hope. So that's what I say about the hope thing. Their hope is that somehow we're going to alter the world system to the place where it's, great or something. And that hope just isn't there. The hope is in Christ and the kingdom of God. And that's a different kingdom. It's entirely different. They don't overlap.
I used to spend a lot of time driving around or just walking around waiting for Jesus to come back at any minute.
Yeah.
I bought into the whole rapture idea. I don't believe that anymore. But I used to think that, all right, just like you just said, there's so much like the end times prophecy type stuff. It's garbage. The kingdom is already here.
Yeah. You enter the kingdom of God when you're born again.
Yeah. But just like you said, they're waiting. Like I would read newspapers looking at what's going on in Israel. Okay. So Jesus is coming back anytime because this is happening in Israel, and maybe I don't know, Donald Trump, I don't know who his spiritual advisors. What's her name?
Oh boy. Paula White. Yes, I was just talking about Dominion theory. There's one of the wackiest ones, and how anybody listens to her and thinks that, boy, that's Christianity is scary. So,
well, I think that the government has done a very good job of perpetuating fear on people, so they feel like they have to be involved with this because they're afraid that if they're not, something bad is going to happen. Man, if you look at what the government is doing and how they act, man, it's bad.
Yeah,
it is bad right now. I mean, if you look at the whole COVID thing, how they've locked people down and cut people's lives off, their ways of making money and, to support their families, that is bad. I don't ever want to hear another person tell me that we are free in this country, because that's baloney.
It's a move of control, and it just shows how much. And I think that in some ways, a little bit of an experiment, and they've been surprised how easy it was to control the masses. But I was surprised how easy it was to control the masses. Honestly, I didn't think people would buckle like they have.
I agree, and I said this to a friend of mine. Back when all this started, I don't think anybody would have predicted that it was going to turn out how it has turned out.
Right. Although it has been a great church growth thing for us, because we kept going, and a lot of the churches, well, probably the vast majority of the churches shut down for that quote 2-week period back in the day. Well, we didn't close, and we picked up a whole bunch of what I call refugees from other churches. So
that's good, though. I mean, I think that's one thing that I'm the most disappointed with right now, is how the church has just accepted how the government is pushing them around.
Well, and that tells you exactly how intertwined the two really are. And it's, and there's a confusion too. It brings us great confusion. And I told our people, I said, why would people in the world think we're any different than anybody else? I mean, if you act just like the world and you put your hope in the government and you got all that sort of thing, you buy into their definitions of prosperity, and your guy can do nothing wrong, the other side can do nothing right. This mentality it's a blindness, and it's almost hypnotic. The system is almost hypnotic.
Yeah, it's sad. I mean, it really breaks my heart to see. I mean, I understood that people, and I don't want this to sound bad, but I understood there's stupid people out there. But watching what's going on, I didn't realize how many stupid people were out there. Like, it just,
a lot of times I say it's the power of wanting to believe something is true. This is kind of a big mantra of mine. The power of wanting to believe something is true is amazing. It's just where people they desire so much to believe something is true. Like, for instance, we go over and bomb a bunch of countries. It must be the right thing to do because we don't want to believe it's the wrong thing to do, because that's rough. So the power of wanting to believe it's true is incredible. And even intelligent people fall victim to this because they just want to believe it's true. And I'd love to believe it's true, but it's not.
Why do you think Christians turn a blind eye to this, though? I mean, why? I don't understand, because if you look, and I mentioned the Sermon on the Mount earlier, if you look at what Jesus taught in the Sermon on the Mount, and then you compare it to what we're doing, let's just pick Yemen. Why in the world are we in Yemen? When has Yemen ever attacked our borders?
Yeah.
And we're over there blowing up their hospitals, their schools, school buses, shut down their water supply. The cholera is spreading in Yemen because they can't get clean water. We are doing this. Our government is doing this, and we keep putting these people in office.
Yeah.
If you think that anything's going to change with Donald Trump or the next Republican, or you think anything's going to change with Joe Biden, they're all the same.
Yeah. Well, look at the Supreme Court. You know, the whole thing. Usually around election, it's around two things. One is our guy from our team, and the other one is the Supreme Court picks. And if you go through the records now of what the Supreme Court has done over the last, decades, just in the time I've been kind of awake and alert, they have all this hope. And here again, I come back to the thing of hope. Our hope is in we get these Supreme Court guys appointed. We get them in there. The world's going to be great. Abortion's going to be abolished. It's all going to be terrific. And I don't know how many decades you have to go through of seeing that not happen before you realize that that's just not working.
I don't know if you're familiar with Keith Giles, but he has a book called Jesus Untangled. And in this book, he talks about abortion being a shiny red button for the Republican Party.
Right.
And Planned Parenthood had its biggest year in federal funding and abortions last year under Donald Trump. And to think that they're going to overturn Roe v. Wade, no, if they overturn it, they have nothing else to talk about.
Right. And that's actually true of a lot of pro-life organizations. They want to get, they fight for restrictions and some things because they can do that. But actually, the abolishing of abortion don't necessarily want it because then they're out of business. So.
Well, I don't know. That's how I became how I started voting for Republicans, is because of the abortion issue. And if you think that the Supreme Court is going to overturn it, it's not going to happen.
No, it's just not happening.
And to be honest with you, the Supreme Court is not a legislative authority.
No, and that shouldn't be seen as making law anyway. And that's and yet you have even these last two appointees, Kavanaugh and Gorsuch, they both made the statement when asked about Roe versus Wade. It's settled law. It's the law of the land. Well, who made that law?
Yeah, they don't have that authority. I mean, if you go read what Thomas Jefferson, his view on the Supreme Court, he didn't like them. And to think that they had some kind of a legislative authority, he said, that's not what they meant. That's not by the Supreme Court. I mean, and I've had Christians tell me that same thing. Well, we got to get a Republican so he can nominate a conservative justice. We don't even have conservatives anymore.
Yeah, and how's that worked for you? That's what I said. Just like
exactly, it's like beating your head against a wall, just hitting your head against a wall. Nothing has changed. Yeah. If anything, it's gotten worse.
Yeah,
I mean, you can go back to the very first president of the United States. He violated his oath immediately.
Yeah.
So and it's just progressively gotten worse, and now people don't even care about the Constitution. They don't care if their guy is. And this was very refreshing. I hated it, but this guy told me, he goes, we don't care if Donald Trump follows the Constitution. We just got to keep the Democrats out of there. I'm like, well, at least I appreciate you being honest.
Yeah.
At least being honest about it, because even liberals and on the left, I have more respect for the left than I do the right, because the left is more honest than the right is. Not that I agree with the left, but they're honest about what they're going to do. They're going to tell you, and they're going to do it. And the Republicans are like, we're going to do it, but we're not going to tell you we're going to do it. We're going to talk about something else.
Right. Yeah. We're going to say we're the ones that put the brakes on, and we're the party of small government. That's just, you'd think people would just laugh hysterically when they hear that at this point. But, the party of small government.
Hey, folks. Craig here. And I'd like to let y'all know we are always looking for writers to contribute to our blog. I don't care if you have any experience or not. 2 or 3 of our contributors had no prior experience writing, and it turns out they have a real knack for it. Our project coordinator helps them put the articles together, and she publishes them on our website and Facebook page, and you will also have the option to come on the show and go more in depth about your article. So if you like what we're doing at The Bad Roman and would like to try your hand at writing, and send us an email at thebadromanpodcast@gmail.com. We're having a blast with this project, and we would love for you to join us in helping promote it. Now back to the show. Now, do you get any kind of pushback from your congregation on your views on this? I mean, not as a collective, but like individually, do they come to you and say, well, what about this? Or do they may not agree with everything you're saying, but how much pushback do you get?
I have a very relational way of pastoring. I think probably a little more than in a lot of places than having been here 20 years. And so I don't know that I call it pushback. I have people that certainly question, and I know many that disagree with me, and yet they will listen to me. And like I say, in a individual situation, if I'm just sitting there having coffee with them talking about this, usually I can talk to them and they'll kind of come to a place of reason. And then they'll just completely forget about that. And I'm quite certain, I don't hear it obviously, but I'm quite certain there are groups that get together and say, "Oh, Benji's kind of crazy on this." He means well, but he's just, idealistic.
You're a Looney Tune.
He's not, Looney Tune, or he's not realistic. He doesn't really understand how the world works. So, these kind of things. I haven't actually heard it myself, but I'm pretty sure it exists in some of those circles.
I welcome the questions because I like to be able to spark a conversation, especially with one-on-one. Let's have a conversation. Let's talk about it and I get a lot of it. I mean, even since we started this project, I get quite a bit of pushback. I get messages privately through our Facebook page or just on my personal page as well. But it's the people that are not engaging the debates.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And that's one thing that I had to realize is that if I'm debating somebody, I'm not actually talking to that person anymore.
Right.
I'm talking to somebody that's paying attention because they're questioning what's going on, but they're looking for a better solution.
Yeah.
Those are the folks I'm talking to. So I had to keep that in mind because I can be a snark, man. I mean, I can. Sometimes it's hard not to be snarky to some of these people, and I try not to be because I want to be as cordial as I can.
I try to plant thoughts and questions and principles and concepts, and I do that both through preaching and teaching and also individually, because you can kind of see when a light starts to go on. And I have had a number of people who were at one point where I was in the early 2000s who have come full circle and are in this place. But it took time, and sometimes it takes some patience in the relationship. And sometimes it has caused, some definite division. But I really believe that planting thoughts and questions and getting people to ask the right questions. A lot of the people wouldn't necessarily approach this with me, partly because they know where I'm at on it. So individually, they're less likely to bring it up. And one of the reasons for that is they know I'm not really going to argue it from a political standpoint. I'm not going to sit here and go, well, yeah, Biden's this and Trump's that, and yeah, he'd be better on this than that. I'm not going to argue from that perspective. I'm going to argue from Scripture and the kingdom of God. And they kind of realize they don't have an answer for that. When you really do start bringing out Scripture and saying, what about this and what about that, and what did Jesus do? What was his proclamation to us? What are supposed to be our priorities? I just spoke on that this morning. What are supposed to be our priorities in this world? And you start talking about that stuff, and all this other stuff seems kind of silly and ridiculous.
Right. Exactly. And there's a lot of ugly out there right now, man. A lot of ugly, and it's disheartening. But these types of conversations, and I think what we're doing, having this conversation and other conversations we have, like you said, we're planting seeds. And I think we're probably not going to see this in our lifetime on any kind of grand scale.
Yeah.
But I do believe that later on, people that might listen to this episode with Benje Graves, they might be saying, wait a second, that makes sense. Let's start trying to follow Jesus like Jesus commanded us to. I mean, it wasn't.
Yeah.
If you follow the words of Jesus, if you follow the teachings of Jesus, you will understand very quickly that government is evil.
Right.
period. And that everything behind government is evil.
And we're still saying, give us a king. We're back to it. And that's, what I always keep coming back to. And it's, like I say, that's on the YouTube channel. And it is, I think that it's at the heart of it, saying, give us a king. It goes all the way back to Israel crying out, give us a king. And here we are, the people of God now, crying out, give us a king. We want a king so we can be like the other nations. We want a king to fight our battles for us. We want a king to rule over us. And as you said, the Lord lists out exactly what that means and says, here's what's going to happen. And it's what happens every single time. And people keep chasing after the same thing over and over again. And then just to come to this idea of, well, America is the greatest country in the world. Well, I don't know. I guess people can sit around and debate this stuff. But that shouldn't be the criteria in any case for God's people. God's people should be, what does the Lord want us to do? He's our king. What are we supposed to be doing in light of that? What do we support? What do we, one of the reasons people ask, they'll say, oh, you got to vote for this guy or otherwise this other guy will get in. I said, the problem with that to me is that a vote is an endorsement.
You're legitimizing the state.
Yeah. If I vote for something or someone, I'm endorsing it now. And I can't endorse something regardless of what's on the other side of that. I can't endorse evil. And a vote is an endorsement, no matter how you look at it.
Well, how many times have you heard the phrase, the lesser of two evils?
It happens all the time. And that's the constant.
Well, I had a friend of mine tell me one time that we were talking about that, the lesser of two evils. And he goes, well, what is more deadly, one gunshot to the head or two?
That's a great statement. I always say that voting for the lesser of two evils is still voting for evil. But I mean, okay, so you could come into the place, if you bring it down to some smaller scale than national politics, say, it's the local mayor running or something. We're in a valley of 500,000 people or something, but we're in a town of 1,000 people. Marsing's a little town, just kind of a bedroom community. So, a mayor here is not really a big consequential thing. But let's say there were two guys, and actually one of them was really good and everything else. And I said, okay, I really like this guy. If he turned out to be really, really great or whatever or something, if you could do that, I'd say, okay, if there's this chance and the Lord led you there, maybe there's something on that level that you could do. If you could honestly, in good conscience, do that. I said, but for the Christian, you've got to be pretty serious about, can you vote in good conscience for somebody? And what Christians typically do, and this is the sad part, is they shut down their conscience in order to be able to vote for that person. They'll shut down their conscience because they're saying, I'm so afraid of this other side or whatever that I'm just going to put my conscience and sometimes common sense out the window because we just got to get this guy in office or we're all going to die. And again, that comes back to where's your trust and where's your hope?
Right. And I've mentioned this in prior episodes, but before I moved to Memphis, I was in serious talks with the Republican Party about running for state legislator or state house. And I mean, I was there, like I had some backing, and I was going to go up against a Democrat that had been there for a while. And I didn't have a whole lot of chance because living in Fayetteville, which is a university town, it's a very liberal town. But in my mind, I was like, all right, I can do some good with this. I can get in there. We're going to promote the Constitution. We're going to promote liberty. And I have a friend of mine, before I ever really started understanding anarchy, and he's an anarchist, but he never talked about being an anarchist. And I would talk to him about it some, but I got so frustrated with him because he would not give me any kind of support for what I was trying to do, is, trying to run for office. And he told me one time, he goes, Craig, I'm going to tell you this. He said, I believe that you have a good heart. I believe that you have a good intentions and that you would probably do good with this. He said, but you're trying to change the mafia from the inside out. That's impossible. And when I started thinking about that, I was like, you know what? That's right. Because, in my view of the government is it's a criminal organization. There's no way around that. They steal from us. They kill people.
Yeah. Taxes are paid as extortion money to the mob. It's just like having a business in the inner city and you pay the mob for protection. Well, you're paying the mob for protection from the mob.
Right. Well, they don't actually protect us either, though. If you think about it, if you look at what's going on right now, like with all the protests, and I'm not against the protests. I'm against all the violence and the looting and all that stuff. But if you look at how, like, some of these people are actually out there peacefully protesting, they're getting pushed around by police officers. Mm-hmm. And they're supposed to be protecting. I mean, that's a First Amendment issue. They're supposed to be protecting that. I mean, the police officers take this same oath that our politicians do.
Right.
But they're out there pushing these people around. There's a guy in Dallas. He was just walking to work. He was walking past a protest. He lost an eye because he got shot in the eye with a rubber bullet. He wasn't even protesting. He was just trying to get to work.
Right.
You know, this is the brutality of the government is just so gross to me. And the fact that Christians will get so up in arms about voting for their guy because he's got a special letter by his name is I don't understand it anymore.
No, and I will say this from an encouraging standpoint. I do see, at least, and again, my part of the society here, I see it changing some. I see people starting to go, wait a minute, there's a problem, and they're starting to kind of get there. You know, we're seeing that lived out right now. We've had some things going through at the State House here in Boise Capitol, and I've had a number of friends down there to oppose some crazy stuff having to do with COVID, the lockdowns, and some of the terrible things. Our governor's been some of the more draconian things out there, is ruining a lot of lives. And the police are there running out the people that are opposed, even though they're just nonviolent. They're just calm. They're mellow. They just want to be in a public meeting, and they're trying to block all of that. And it looks like SWAT teams and everything down there to try to block it all. It's a crazy thing.
Well, if you look at with everything that's gone on with these lockdowns, I saw a stat the other day that the alcohol sales has gone up 300%. Suicide rates are spiking. Like we're seeing more suicide rates. Like there was a point, it's probably still the case here in Tennessee, that at one point there were more suicide deaths than there were COVID deaths. And it all started with these lockdowns. My brother just recently passed away.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And we are convinced, like he bought into this fear. He totally bought into this fear of this virus, and he lost, he got furloughed from his job. But he was afraid to go anywhere because of this. And I truly believe that the lockdowns accelerated his death.
We've seen that in a number of cases. Yeah.
If I didn't have a reason to dislike the government before, I damn sure do now.
Yeah. And, it said when this started out, when it started locking up and everything else, is that, suicides, even though I pastor a church, not a huge church here, 100 people, I'm connected with many, many people from all the years of traveling and the writing and all the stuff. And so I'm kind of connected with other leaders, pastors all over the place. So I hear a lot of stuff, and suicides are just way up. And I saw that coming. And also for whatever reason, in the character of our ministry, we end up dealing with a lot of people who are struggling with addictions and all that. And that just skyrockets. It's just, that was inevitable. And then as people are losing their businesses, losing their livelihoods, losing their houses, things just go off the charts. And that's where we are, and it's heading to a worse place.
Yeah, and when you take folks' means of supporting their family or feeding their kids away from them, it's almost, they're at a helpless state. And there was a town not too far from where I live. There were two teachers right after this started, and I'm talking about teachers they were married together. They were married. They both committed suicide and both had children.
Wow.
And so, like, they have to understand these people are trying to feed their kids, and you're taking their livelihoods away from them. It's so sad to me, man. It breaks my heart, and
it's terrible. And even beyond the livelihoods, there's the relational issues, taking away relationships, taking away their church families if their churches went and closed down, all that stuff. And then, part of this is this whole control issue of trying to lead to the collective. And I don't know if you ever watch Star Trek or anything, but you have the whole, the Borg collective, and you will be assimilated. All of this, we're all in this together stuff, and everything else is getting us all to where it's almost like we serve the emperor, and we're all in it together, and we're all some kind of beehive or ant farm collective, and instead of individuals.
Well, the government's done a fantastic job of getting the citizens to police other citizens with all this stuff. Now, I myself can't wear a mask. I have an underlying health issue that will not allow me to. I had to talk to a doctor about it to get, I got a doctor's note and stuff. But I was when I got back from Fayetteville, I was sitting in the doctor's office on a Monday morning. There's another guy sitting in there. He had a mask on. He was fiddling with it. He was really sick of it. He just pulled it below his chin.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting there with no mask. I'm watching TV, and this girl walks out. I'm not paying her any attention, but I can see she's looking at me, and she turns a corner and goes to the front desk, and she's Then I hear her. She starts talking to the lady up there. She said, "I'm gonna have to report this. I don't know why they think they can sit in here without a mask on."
Oh yeah.
And then my radar goes up.
Yeah.
I'm like, "Oh, she's talking about me."
Yeah.
So I ignored it. I didn't say nothing. I just kept watching TV. She was walking out the door. She hooked her arm and came back in, and she looked directly at me. And I looked at her, and she said, "Sir, it says right here on this door that you're supposed to be wearing a mask. Why do you think you're not supposed to wear a mask? There are people that have to come in here, and you are putting them in danger." And I said, "Wait a second. I said, you have a mask on your face. We're not within 6 feet of each other. What are you worried about?"
Right. Right.
So you need to understand that other people are coming in here. You might be putting them in danger. And I'm like, all right, first of all, not that it's any of your business,
Yeah.
but I have an underlying health issue that will not allow me to wear a mask. I said, my doctor knows about it. The nurses know about it. And the front desk knew about it. This was all cleared beforehand. And she goes, "Well, let's just hope that's true." And she turned around and walked out. And I'm so sick of this stuff, man.
Oh, it's insane. And right here, again, here in Marston, we're a little bit, it's not as prevalent. It's still around, but it's not as prevalent. We went to Oregon here, my wife and I, just because my brother and sister-in-law were in a motorcycle accident. They're kind of recovering from it now. But anyway, we're over there, and you see it a lot more over there. Right here, if I didn't leave our little town, it's almost, and of course, our church is not really in line with all that. But I asked myself, I said, how did this happen? How is it that they can just say wear a mask, and all these people, not only do they run out and wear masks, that'd be one thing if they weren't telling me to do it, but how did we come to this thing where, I got emails and texts and people saying I was going to kill their grandmothers and all that kind of stuff because we kept the church going, and I'm basically become complicit in attempted murder or something by not wearing a mask or keeping a church building open. It's like, just, how did we get here? So
I don't know, man. The government pushes fear, and people buy into fear, and let's just follow Jesus.
Yeah, and that's part of it. Fear is not faith. That's something we've been talking about all the way. If your motivation comes from panic and fear, whether that's politics or buying into this COVID stuff or whatever, if it's coming from fear, it's just not faith.
Well, I mean, the Bible's pretty clear. We were not created with a spirit of fear.
Right.
But of love. And I don't care if a person wants to wear a mask. Have a ball. You can wear it wherever you want to, but just leave me alone. It's none of your business.
They can wear a full gas mask for all I care. It's just a matter of, it's just this whole idea of mandating all this stuff. And I just can't believe that churches just closed down because the government said to do it. Now, I understand early on there was a lot of rhetoric, a lot of stuff. This thing was coming over. It was the plague. It was going to kill half the population, whatever. I understand a lot of pastors. And I myself was going, what are we going to do? One of the things that helped solidify me is the governor came out with this lockdown order. And then I said, well, there's no way we're closing down then. It kind of solidified us on the other side. But it's because for the government, the time when the government starts mandating that we can't meet as believers, it isn't about Sunday morning. It's not about Wednesday nights. What I tell people, it's about being able to gather as believers. And when the government starts saying you can't gather as believers, there's a problem. So that's an issue.
Well, it's funny to me, and when a governor issues an executive order, people take that as law, and it's actually executive orders don't apply to us. That's supposed to be for the executive office, and people just take that. Well, he said so, and even police officers that are enforcing these executive orders are violating their oath.
Exactly. And we did that. People kept coming and said, it's the law. The governor issued an order. And so it's the law. I said, no, it's not the law. It's some guy up there in his place, partly because he got extra CARES money from the feds, decided to say, okay, you all have to close your stuff down. Well, sorry, not doing that.
Right. Well, man, I really appreciate your time. This has been a fun conversation. And do you have anything you'd like to plug? You said you have a YouTube channel.
Yeah, I do have a YouTube channel. They just search my name. It's Benje Graves, Benje. Everybody always spells it J-I because of the dog in the old movie, but it's Benje Graves, Graves on YouTube. And then also on sermonaudio.com. There's sermonaudio.com/VCC. That brings you into probably hundreds of messages and sermons.
Awesome. Well, let's just keep preaching the whole no king but Christ.
That's right.
Christ is our hope, and that guy, that he is our king, and let's follow him and ignore what government's telling us.
Man.
All right, buddy.
Amen.
I really appreciate your time, and I would like to do this again sometime if you don't mind.
Love it. That'd be great.
Awesome, man. All right, I'll talk to you later.
Thanks for joining us this week on the Bad Roman Podcast. Be sure to subscribe to the show wherever you find your podcasts to never miss an episode. And while you're at it, if you like what you heard, we'd appreciate a rating on iTunes. Or if you'd simply tell a friend about the show, it really helps people find us. 100% of donations are given to local charities in Memphis, Tennessee. To learn more about the Bad Roman Project and to find show notes, please visit thebadroman.com.